They say paradise has no price. But here, in Eden Heights, paradise came with a contract, and a president who thought he was God. Mirza Aftab, not elected, installed, HOA president for 6 years straight. He didn't lead, he ruled, and no one dared defy him. It started small. One warning for a misaligned flower pot. Then came fines, threats, foreclosures, and behind it all, silence. They underestimated us. All tyrants do. We weren't rebels. Not yet. Just neighbors. But pain teaches people how to whisper and plan. Revolution never comes all at once. It starts with a parking ticket, a wrong fine, a phone call not returned. That spark found dry grass. They had power, but we had something better. Each other. We gathered late at night in kitchens, garages, whispers. We connected the dots, followed the money and the paper trail. Led straight to him. One drop of truth, that's all it took. Then came the flood, leaked emails, bank statements, illegal fines. The whole neighborhood watched the emperor fall, one document at a time. He tried to hold on, but power built on fear collapses fast. He was removed in a vote no one dared challenge. Even his allies went silent. It wasn't perfect, but it was free. The fences still stood, but now they protected, not imprisoned. People still talk about him, about how fear ruled, and how truth reclaimed the land. But me? I just walk, and I remember what we almost lost. Standards when he himself had to settle with the IRS over unpaid taxes just a few years ago. Perhaps we should focus on putting our own affairs in order before pointing fingers at others. It was a low blow. Samuel had indeed gone through an audit, but it was due to a clerical mistake that had been fully resolved. The way Karen portrayed it, though, made it sound like he was a tax evader. The meeting fell apart further when Sapphira Duskland hesitantly suggested that maybe a community vote should happen before making such major changes to lake rules. Karen gave her a cold glare. Sapphira, isn't your flower shop's lease up for renewal soon? It would be unfortunate if complications arose. The threat wasn't even veiled, and Sapphira instantly withdrew. Watching this public act of bullying, I felt strangely calm. Karen had no clue that her grand vision had already been dismantled, that the lake she was putting forward as her crown jewel no longer belonged to Meridian, and would never belong to her. Just knowing what was coming nearly made up for months of harassment. In the meantime, Karen had used her connection with Mayor James Wilson to put pressure on me through city bureaucracy. Suddenly, my house was hit with random safety inspections. There were questions about renovation permit zones the previous owner had gotten years ago. The mayor didn't get his hands dirty himself, but his building inspector, Karen's cousin-in-law, was suddenly extremely concerned with my deck's structural soundness. The pressure was working. When Sen came home crying for the third time in 2 weeks because classmates were shunning her over neighborhood rumors, I nearly gave up. But then I got the call I'd been waiting for. Meridian's lawyer confirmed that Karen had just been notified. The lake property had been sold to an anonymous third-party investor, and all her negotiations were over. Just a few hours later, Karen was at my doorstep, her usual calm mask starting to slip. "What did you do?" she demanded, skipping all small talk. "I know you've been talking to Meridian. Did you sabotage my deal?" I smiled politely. "I don't know what you mean, Karen, though I did hear the lake was sold. Hopefully the HOA has a solid relationship with the new owner." Her eyes narrowed. "This isn't over. The HOA has a standing recreational use agreement. Whoever bought that lake can't change access without our consent." "You might want to check the terms of that agreement," I replied coolly. "From what I understand, it expires in less than 30 days, and renewal is entirely up to the property owner." Karen's expression faltered, but she quickly recovered. "The community won't allow this. We'll sue for access rights." "Good luck with that," I said, still smiling as I closed the door. The next 24 hours were fascinating. Karen called an emergency HOA board, meeting closed to everyone else. Through our network, we found out she was panicking, trying to figure out who the new owner was, scrambling to find ways to keep the lake under her thumb. She even dragged Mayor Wilson in, asking him to explore zoning or eminent domain claims, but Merrick assured me none of it had any legal merit, given the land's classification and history. Over the following week, Karen's desperation grew. She formed a legal committee, claiming the HOA would fight for control of the lake. The mayor made noise about zoning laws and public access rules. But as mayor confirmed, none of that stood legally since the property was privately owned. Meanwhile, I discreetly brought in a water quality expert and a local conservation group. Their findings were alarming. Years of careless use of landscaping chemicals had led to abnormal algae growth, and the fish were under stress. The HOA had utterly ignored the lake's actual environmental condition, even as they used conservation concerns as an excuse to ban fishing and other activities. I also consulted a security specialist about installing cameras and developing a formal management plan. Everything was being set up for the moment I would finally reveal myself as the owner. The turning point came when Karen tried to make a show of force. She hosted a massive lakeside gathering open, only to original homeowners, deliberately excluding newer residents. It was a power move, meant to assert that the lake belonged to their group. The event was set for a Saturday afternoon, complete with catered food, music, and wine bars at each end of the lake. What Karen didn't know was that I'd already filed the legal paperwork to end the recreational use agreement early, citing numerous violations of its maintenance terms. My lawyer confirmed that the HOA's failure to meet water standards gave us plenty of legal ground to terminate. Even if we hadn't, the agreement would have ended in under a month. So, I decided this would be the moment. As Karen's party reached its peak, about 60 people mingling lakeside, I arrived with Merrick, Samuel, and 2 surprise guests. My real estate attorney and a local police officer I had previously briefed. I calmly walked to the center of the gathering and picked up the microphone Karen had been using. "Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're enjoying this lovely day by the lake." Karen stormed over. "This is a private community event. You weren't invited." I held the microphone firmly. "Actually, Karen, I believe there's been a mix-up over who's supposed to be sending out the invites." I nodded to my attorney, who handed me a document. "As the legal owner of this lake and the 10-foot perimeter surrounding it, I'm informing you all that you're currently trespassing on private property." The crowd went silent. Karen turned crimson. "What are you talking about? This is HOA property." "No, Karen, it never was. It belonged to Meridian Development until 3 days ago, when I bought it outright." I held up the deed for everyone to see. Effective immediately, I'm terminating the recreational use agreement, which was set to expire in 28 days anyway. I gestured to the officer. "I've asked Officer Reynolds to help ensure a smooth departure from my property. You have 15 minutes to gather your things and leave." Karen stood frozen, stunned as if someone had doused her in ice water. "You can't do this. The community has rights." "Actually, I can, and I have," I replied calmly. "Officer Reynolds has a trespassing report ready if needed, but I'm confident it won't come to that. After all, Karen, you've always insisted on following the rules." As murmurs rose in the crowd, I continued. "For anyone wondering, this is what happens when someone abuses power unchecked. This is what consequences look like." The party ended quickly. Many guests cast cold, blaming looks at Karen as they left. Some even came up to me privately. A mix of shock and, surprisingly, respect. "About time someone did it," one of them whispered. Stood up to her. One long-time resident whispered as he passed, "This has been a long time coming." Within the week, I had private property, no trespassing signs installed around the lake perimeter, and hired security to patrol the area 24 hours a day. I also organized a small press conference with the local newspaper to announce my plans to convert the lake into a natural fish conservation area and educational space for children to learn about the local ecosystem. "The lake has been environmentally neglected for years," I explained to the reporters. "Our water quality tests show concerning levels of phosphates and nitrates from lawn chemicals. My team of environmental experts will be implementing a restoration plan to return this beautiful resource to a healthy state." The community reaction was mixed, but increasingly favorable. As details of Karen's planned development leaked out, many residents who had initially been upset about losing lake access became supportive when they learned about her intention to build private homes on part of the shoreline. The revelation that she had been planning to profit personally from community property shifted public opinion dramatically. Karen was livid. She attempted to sue me for destruction of community value, but her case was dismissed almost immediately when my attorney presented the clear property deed and expired access agreement. She then tried to rally the HOA to implement punitive measures against me, additional fines, restrictions, even attempting to force a lien on my property. But many residents were beginning to question whose interests she really represented. The tide truly turned when Sapphira Duskand finally found the courage to speak up at an HOA meeting. "I've been on this board for 3 years," she said, her voice shaking at first but growing stronger. "And I've watched Karen manipulate regulations, target specific homeowners, and divert HOA funds to pet projects that primarily benefit her friends' properties. Last year, we spent $80,000 to renovate the North Side Park that only serves about 10 homes owned by Karen's friends, while rejecting basic playground equipment for the main park used by dozens of families. Sapphira's stand inspired others. At the next HOA meeting, several longtime residents spoke up about various abuses they had witnessed but been afraid to mention. The floodgates had opened, and years of pent-up frustration with Karen's leadership poured out. A motion was proposed to audit all HOA finances for the past 5 years. More board members began to question Karen's leadership as financial records were scrutinized and irregularities emerged. The community was fracturing, but not along the lines Karen had expected. Instead of uniting against me, many residents were beginning to see the HOA leadership as the real problem. As more residents began to question Karen's leadership, I announced a special program: free fishing passes for all children in the community. There was just one exception. Children of current HOA leadership would not be eligible until their parents resigned from the board. It was petty, perhaps, but effective. The most satisfying moment came when several residents who had previously sneered at me alongside Karen started showing up at my door asking if their children could possibly be granted fishing passes. Some even began openly criticizing Karen, the same people who had been her staunch supporters weeks earlier. "My son really wants to learn to fish," admitted Veronica Palmer, who had vocally supported Karen at HOA meetings. "He says your daughter mentioned a junior conservation program." Her discomfort was palpable as she stood on my doorstep. The same woman who had deliberately turned away when I greeted her at the community pool just weeks earlier. "Yes, we're starting an educational program for kids," I confirmed. "It focuses on ecology, conservation, and sustainable fishing practices. Selen is helping to organize it." I paused deliberately. "Of course, it's only open to families who aren't currently represented on the HOA board." Veronica's expression was a fascinating mixture of frustration and calculation. "I've been reconsidering my position on the board lately. The recent decisions seem quite concerning." "How interesting," I replied neutrally. "Well, if your situation changes, please let me know. The program starts next Saturday." Within 3 days, Veronica had publicly resigned from the HOA board citing personal reasons. 2 other board members followed suit within the week. Karen grew desperate. She spread rumors that the lake was polluted and dangerous. Claims I quickly debunked by publishing professional water quality test results showing it was actually cleaner than when under HOA management. Then she made her most desperate move yet, attempting to bribe Merrick Henderson with promises to clear all his past HOA violations and offering him a position on a new board once she resolved the lake situation. What she didn't know was that Merrick recorded the entire conversation. "I can make all those violation notices disappear, Merrick," Karen's voice said clearly on the recording. "And there would be a place for you on the restructured board with a stipend, of course. All you need to do is help convince Thorncraft to sell the lake to the HOA. Tell him about the environmental liabilities, the insurance costs. Scare him a little." Merrick played the recording for me with a satisfied smile. "I think our friend Karen has forgotten the first rule of being a villain: never try to corrupt a retired ethics attorney." The final act of Karen's reign came late one night, when my security cameras captured her and 2 other HOA board members trespassing on my property, apparently attempting to collect water samples, or more likely, contaminate the water to support her pollution claims. The footage clearly showed Karen pouring something from a small bottle into the lake near where children often fished. I immediately sent the video to the police. Karen was charged with criminal trespassing and attempted environmental contamination. As she was being processed at the local police station, investigators began looking more closely at HOA finances during her tenure. What they found led to additional investigations into misappropriation of funds, selective enforcement of regulations based on personal relationships, and evidence that she had been using her position to drive down certain property values before her real estate connections purchased them. 2 weeks later, I invited all community residents, except the current HOA leadership, to a meeting at my home to discuss the future of the lake. The turnout was extraordinary, with nearly every household represented. I laid out my proposal. I would transfer ownership of the lake to a newly established community trust with 3 conditions. First, the HOA leadership would need to be completely restructured, with term limits and transparent voting procedures. Second, all HOA regulations would be reviewed and amended to ensure fair and equal application. Third, an independent ethics committee with rotating community membership would be established to oversee HOA decisions. Then I revealed my final move-on that even Merrick and Samuel hadn't known about. Many of you may not be aware, I explained to the stunned gathering, but during the past month, I've also been quietly purchasing the mortgage notes on several properties in this community from Lakeside National Bank. I paused to let this sink in, including Karen Wellington's home. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Using my financial connections and Samuel's banking relationships, I had indeed purchased the debt obligations on nearly 20% of the community's homes, focusing particularly on properties owned by Karen and her closest allies. It was perfectly legal if unconventional and gave me significant leverage. I have no intention of foreclosing on anyone or calling in these debts, I assured the concerned faces before me. In fact, I'm prepared to offer refinancing at below market rates to every homeowner. But first, we need to fix the broken system that's been dividing this community for years. The vote to replace the HOA leadership was nearly unanimous. Karen Wellington was forced to resign in disgrace, facing not only the criminal charges for trespassing and attempted contamination, but also multiple civil lawsuits from homeowners who had been unfairly targeted by her policies. Her real estate company came under investigation for unethical practices, and within months, she had put her house on the market finding no takers due to her now toxic reputation. Sapphira Duskand was elected as the new HOA president, promising comprehensive reforms and transparency. The lake was officially renamed Rachel's Lake in honor of my late wife, and I transferred ownership to the newly established community trust with legally binding conditions ensuring it would remain accessible to all residents in perpetuity. 3 months after the whole ordeal began, Selin and I hosted a community fishing day at Rachel's Lake. Nearly every family in the neighborhood attended, children laughing and learning to fish together, parents chatting amicably across social circles that had previously been rigidly separated by Karen's influence. As Selin and I sat on the dock that evening after everyone had gone home, watching the sunset reflect on the water, she smiled. A real, full smile that reached her eyes. "Mom would be really proud of you, Dad," she said softly, leaning against my shoulder, looking out over the peaceful lake where families had gathered in harmony for the first time in years. I thought about how justice sometimes comes not from winning, but from rebuilding what was broken. "I think she'd be proud of both of us, kiddo," I replied. 1 year later, our community had become a model for HOA reform, with several neighboring developments adopting our governance structure and ethics guidelines. Karen Wellington had moved away after losing most of her assets in the lawsuits. I was approached about running for mayor after James Wilson decided not to seek re-election following revelations about his relationship with Karen, but I declined. Instead, I established a scholarship fund in Rachel's name for children who had lost a parent to cancer. Sometimes the best way to defeat a bully isn't to become a bigger bully. It's to change the rules of the game entirely. And if you're watching this video while dealing with your own HOA nightmare, remember, never underestimate the power of someone who understands the rules and has the patience to wait for the perfect moment to